Okay, welcome to Week 7, the Early Republic and the War of 1812. This lecture is a little bit shorter than some of the previous ones. Next week's will probably be as well, and the idea is for you guys to spend a little bit more time on the discussion posts, not just your own, but also the discussion and the conversation with other students in their comments as well. So let's start with the Articles of Confederation. The first written Constitution of the United States was the Articles of Confederation. Drafted by Congress in 1777 and ratified by the states 4 years later, the Articles sought to balance the need for national coordination of the war for independence with widespread fear that centralized political power posed a danger to liberty. It resembled less a blueprint for a common government than a treaty for mutual defense among the states. The national government consisted of a one-house Congress, in which each state, no matter how large or populous, cast a single vote. There was no president to enforce the laws, and no judiciary to interpret them. Major decisions required the approval of 9 states rather than a simple majority. The Articles made national government weak, and amendments required unanimity from all states. Overall, the Articles were a positive first step in the United States' attempt at complete self-rule, but greatly limited the power of the federal government. Establishing rules for the settlement of the western portion of the nation, the area controlled by the federal government stretching from the western boundaries of existing states to the Mississippi River, was by no means an easy task. Although some Americans spoke of it as if it were empty, who lived there? Some 10,000 Indians, in fact, inhabited the region. Congress took the position that by aiding the British, Indians had forfeited the right to their lands. Little distinction was made among tribes that had sided with the enemy. At peace conferences in 1784 and 1785, American representatives demanded and received large surrenders of Indian land north of the Ohio River. Similar treaties soon followed in the South, although there, Congress guaranteed the permanency of the Indians' remaining much reduced holdings. The treaty secured national control of a large part of the country's western territory. Settlement in the West produced conflicting ideas about government's role in the new Union. The Confederation government faced pressure from land companies lobbying Congress in the hopes of profiting from real estate purchases and reselling land to settlers. At the same time, many leaders believed that the economic health of the new republic required that farmers have access to land in the West. However, selling land to developers could mean revenue for the republic. The debate over whether or not the government should step aside, allowing private groups to control the West's economic development, or control the distribution of Western lands, persisted. The arrival of post-revolutionary peace, meanwhile, triggered a large population movement from settled parts of the original states into frontier areas like upstate New York and across the Appalachian Mountains and Kentucky and Tennessee. To settlers, the right to take possession of Western lands and use them as they saw fit was an essential element of American freedom. Indeed, settlers paid no heed to Indian land titles and urged the government to set a low price on public land or give it away. Courts in states with frontier lands like Kentucky were filled with lawsuits over land claims, and these disputes even forced some settlers to leave Kentucky for opportunities in other states. A series of measures by Congress during the 1780s redefined the terms by which Western land would be marketed and settled. The Land Ordinance of 1784 established stages of self-government for the West, dividing the region into districts. Land would be surveyed by the government and then sold into sections, with some set aside for public education. But settlers, still believing the land was theirs to take, violated the new rules by pressing westward before surveys were complete. And for many decades, actual and prospective settlers pressed for a reduction in the price of government-owned land, a movement that did not end until the Homestead Act of 1862 offered free land on the public domain. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 called for the eventual establishment of from 3 to 5 states north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi. This was the first official recognition that Indians continued to own their land. Congress realized that allowing settlers and state government simply to seize Indian lands would produce endless, expensive military conflicts on the frontier. Just like, remember, the Proclamation Line of 1763 issued by the British was designed to prevent frontier skirmishes as well. But national land policy assumed that whether through purchase, treaties, or voluntary removal, the Indian presence would soon disappear. The ordinance also prohibits slavery in the Northwest, a provision that would have far-reaching consequences into the 19th century. But for years, owners brought slaves into the area, claiming they had voluntarily signed long-term labor contracts. The Articles of Confederation were a good first step, but many influential Americans viewed it as a failure. The national government and country at large faced worsening economic problems. Congress had borrowed large sums of money to fund the War for Independence and found itself unable to pay its debts. American ships were now barred from trading with the British Empire's West Indies. Imported goods, however, flooded the market, undercutting the business of many craftsmen, driving down wages, and draining money out of the country. With the Articles weakening the power of the federal government, Congress was unable to act. In late 1786 and early 1787, crowds of debt-ridden farmers closed the courts in western Massachusetts to prevent the seizure of their land for failure to pay taxes. The uprising came to be known as Shays' Rebellion, after Daniel Shay, one of the leaders and a veteran of the war. The governor responded by dispatching an army headed by former War General Benjamin Lincoln. The rebels were dispersed in January of 1787, and more than 1,000 were arrested. Observing Shays' Rebellion from Paris, Thomas Jefferson refused to be alarmed. He wrote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." The uprising was a culmination of events of the 1780s that persuaded an influential group of Americans that the national government must be strengthened. Shays' Rebellion showed that the federal government needed to develop uniform economic policies and protect private property owners from infringements on their lands, on their rights by local majorities. Shays' Rebellion also produced fears that the revolution's democratic impulse had gotten out of hand. That is the depiction of the signing of the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. In May of 1787, the states, with the exception of Rhode Island, sent delegates to a Philadelphia convention. When they assembled, they decided to scrap the Articles of Confederation entirely and drafted a new constitution for the United States. The 55 men who gathered at the Constitutional Convention included some of the most prominent Americans. Among the delegates were George Washington, who served as presiding officer. More than half the delegates had college education, compared to 1% of the American population. They shared a common belief in the need to strengthen national authority and curb what they called an excess of democracy. To ensure free and candid debate, the deliberations took place in private. Now, just want to point out that democracy is a dirty word to the founders. They want a republic. A democracy is, the people having control in the government, and they don't want the regular ordinary people to have political power. They want a republic. While the delegates agreed on several points, differences quickly emerged over the proper balance between federal and state governments and between the interests of large and small states. In the end, a compromise was reached. A two-house Congress consisting of a Senate in which each state had 2 members, and a House of Representatives apportioned according to population. Senators would be chosen by state legislatures, while representatives would be elected every 2 years directly by the people. Senators would not be elected until the early 20th century. Under the Articles of Confederation, no national official had been chosen by popular vote. Thus, the mode of choosing the House of Representatives represented an expansion in democracy. The Constitution, moreover, imposed neither property nor religious qualifications for voting, leaving it to the states to set voting rules. Overall, however, democracy had its limits under the new structure. Popular enthusiasms and whims resulting in actions like Shays' Rebellion left delegates with the desire to shield national government from the wrong kinds of people holding office. The House of Representatives was originally quite small, initially 65 members, on the assumption that only prominent individuals could win elections in large districts. The new system of government did not provide for direct election of either federal judges or the president. The president would appoint Supreme Court justices, and either the House or the Electoral College would choose the president. Hammered out in 4 months of discussion and compromise, the Constitution is a document of only 4,000 words that provides only the briefest outline of the new structure of government. It embodies 2 basic principles: federalism, sometimes called the division of powers, and the system of checks and balances between different branches of government, also known as the separation of powers. Federalism refers to the relationship between the federal government and the states. The Constitution greatly strengthened national authority. As I'm sure you know, it granted the president the power to enforce the law and command the military. It empowered Congress to levy taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce, declare war, deal with foreign nations and Indians, and promote the general welfare. So here's a bit of a civics lesson and a refresher for most of you, if not all of you. The separation of powers, or checks and balances, refers to the way the Constitution seeks to prevent any branch of the national government from dominating the other 2. To prevent an accumulation of power dangerous to liberty, authority within the government is diffused and balanced against itself. Congress enacts laws, but the president can veto them, and a 2/3 majority is required to pass legislation over his objection. Federal judges are nominated by the president and approved by Congress, but to ensure their independence, the judges then serve for life. The president can be impeached by the House and removed from office by the Senate for high crimes and misdemeanors. Most, if not all of that, should sound familiar to you guys. And the next part of the lecture, slavery, will take place in part 2 of the video.